Hey, John. Yeah, she is.
Yeah, we don't need to record this, do we?
All right, there we go. Well, good evening. I'm glad everybody's here to listen to Charmaine, who I have just met this evening. And so with just meeting her, obviously I don't have much in the way of an introduction other than her name and that she talks funny. That's about all that I can tell you. But we're going to learn a whole lot more behind her heart and her passion and her ministry that she does. And some of you have heard her, and I'm looking forward to that. I want to open us up in a word of prayer, and then I'm going to introduce you to somebody who is then going to introduce you to Charmaine. So we can do an introduction to an introduction, but it'll be better that way. So let's go to the Lord. Father God, we thank you for believers gathered into this room tonight. God, it's rewarding to know that our faith and the ministry of the Holy Spirit and your ministry go out, not only to this county and to this state, but God, it's global. Lord, it's rewarding to hear from people that are outside of our area and outside of Tennessee and even outside of the U.S. who get to tell us what it's like in other places. God, it brings to our minds how fortunate we have it here. God, I thank you that you are Lord in all circumstances throughout the entire earth. It's nights like these where we can see your hand moving in other places. So Lord, I pray that you be with our time and that we would be able to see your hand moving in other places. All right, now I did talk with Malcolm, right? Malcolm, who they live in Murfreesboro prior to the service tonight. And so I'm going to turn this over to Malcolm and let him introduce his daughter. I think there's no better person to do so. So here you go.
Great. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you all. And it's great to be together tonight. I've known Charmaine for some time. We live in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and she lives in Israel. But as a family, we've been involved in Christian ministry all our lives. It feels like that. I entered the ministry in 1975. A long time ago. And Charmaine was brought up in our family, of course, and that is in South Africa. She was born in Cape Town. 2 years ago was voted the most beautiful city in the whole world. It is, if you've been there. It's an incredible city, very beautiful. She was born there, and while we were studying theology, at the Faculty of Theology in Cape Town. And so she was brought up in a Christian home, and she was part of our history, which included activism, one of that. So she's a troublemaker. And we eventually ended up in Israel, where I was part of a church plant in Jerusalem, and the family lived all together in Israel for 14 years, 11 of which I was the executive director of the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. It was in those years particularly that Charmaine felt very strongly the call of God over her life to engage the suffering church. And God brought her into contact with the suffering Sudanese church. She will tell you something about it. I'm sure tonight we have 2 million Sudanese Christians who are murdered by the Janjaweed. These are radical Muslims from the north of North Sudan. And the world knows very little about it, and much of the world could care less, to be honest. And these people years ago put out a DVD, I saw it in Washington, D.C. at the time. And after they had suffered such a tragedy, 2 million people being murdered, some of them had their limbs cut off, and then they were crucified on trees. They never denied their faith in Christ. And they put a out of DVD, and the title of which was "We Thought God Forgot Us," because nobody came to care for them in the West. No one. Eventually, only a few people came, and the one was Samaritan's Purse of Franklin Graham. The other one was Charmaine Heading, and the other one was the State of Israel. They turned up in a clandestine manner to save the Christians of South Sudan because of our daughter's activity. So she's been involved with the persecuted church for years now, very dangerous work. I told her, I'm not going, I'm scared, I'm not going here. She was working in Iraq in the time of ISIS, in the Nineveh plain. I'm not going there, I said. You can go there, not me. But she went in because the call of God was over her life, you see. The call of God makes the difference. And helped the suffering church of the Nineveh plain. Hundreds of thousands of Christians plundered, murdered, raped, killed, beheaded. Terrible story. And these are part of our brethren. And it's true, as Jeremy said, don't think it won't come. Many places in the world didn't think it would come. In the Second World War, Europe never thought that this beautiful continent would be bombed, literally, quote unquote, to hell. But it was. And the suffering church tonight is all over the world. Millions of Christians. The Jewish world has stated, and the famous guy is Lauder, famous for Estee Lauder. And the owner of that is Ron Lauder. Actually a wonderful man. And he publicly said the most persecuted group in the world today is the Christian church, and it's growing. And he said, actually, I heard him at a conference, and Israel will come to help them. My daughter is an Israeli citizen. She's Israeli. She lives in North Tel Aviv. She has a lovely little view of the Mediterranean from her apartment. Man, it's nice. Very nice. But from there, she travels into the most dangerous parts of the world to rescue Christians. Thank you for coming tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Charmaine Heading.
Well, good evening. Can you hear me at the back? Good. It's a privilege and an honor to be here with you tonight, and I just want to thank Pastor Jeremy for allowing me to come in and to speak. Thank you very, very much. I want to talk about the subject of the persecuted church and what is happening today. It's a hard topic. The films and the videos that I will show you today show some of the violence and the persecution. It's not easy, and I see that there are some children in the room. So if you are concerned, now would be the time to consider whether you want them to stay. It's not super graphic, but it is a little bit scary. Today, an average of 11 Christians lose their lives every single day. The figures are astronomical. Something like 250 million Christians in the world today live under severe persecution. In the Middle East in particular, in countries like Iraq and Syria, these were the two countries where the first Christians in Syria were called in the book of Acts Christians. So we're talking about Christianity in the first early church that has had a history in this area for over 2,000 years, predating Islam 7 centuries, is now on their knees and their blood cries out. I work mostly in the Middle East and North Africa because this is the area where Christians and Christianity is possibly, we are seeing the end. In areas like Iraq and Syria and Egypt, where some of these Christian churches and early churches have been big communities, in 1914, for example, they represented 20% of the population. Today, in this area, there's less than 5% left. You can ask yourself, how is this possible? Well, we call it a slow burn genocide. Or if you're wondering if there are any Jews left in Syria or Iraq, there aren't any. In Egypt, there's about 9 Jews left. First, the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. I just came out of Israel 2 weeks ago, where thanks to Iran, the Gaza Strip rained down 460 rockets on the state of Israel. I was sitting in my bomb shelter for nearly 2 days, and the whole country of Israel was on a total lockdown because the civilian population was being attacked by Hamas. And we had news reports that went out to us throughout the whole of Israel because we were getting bombed even in Tel Aviv. And they said to us, for 2 days, we're not allowed to go to schools, universities. We're not allowed to gather in public areas, like if we wanted to go to a sports stadium or into a shopping mall. And they told us, do not be more than 90 seconds away from your bomb shelter. Can you imagine living like that? That's how I lived 2 weeks ago. And for 2 days, we weren't allowed to move. And when we heard the sirens, we had 90 seconds before that missile would hit, and we had to get inside our bomb shelter. This is what's happening to the Jews and the Christians and other minorities in the Middle East. My organization actually was started here in Murfreesboro in Tennessee, and I felt the call of God speaking to me to really reach out and to help the Christian communities in North Africa and the Middle East. And we help about 10,000 persecuted Christians every single year with your help and others like you. But we have a very, very strong base here in Tennessee. And the people of Tennessee have been amazing in how they've risen to this cause and to care about the body of Christ. So I'm going to start with a short introduction, the first video. I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 countries that we work in, Syria, Iraq, and Egypt. And as I go, I will show videos from each one. If we could play the first video, it explains a little bit about what we do. And it's taken in Iraq when it was still a militarized zone in the Nineveh Plains where the Christians used to live.
Oops.
We live in a world where over 65 million people have been up.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. There we go.
We live in a world where over 65 million people have been uprooted by conflict and disasters.
In Iraq, where the country's second largest city, Mosul, is under control of militants.
Iraq is a country ravaged by conflict where ethnic and religious minorities are tortured, murdered, abducted, and displaced.
The militants belong to the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, which started out as an Al-Qaeda affiliate.
Children are being taken from their families, sold into sex trafficking, and forced to become child soldiers.
Some reports say 500,000 people have already fled the city. Bloody civil war in the name of Islamic law.
Millions of Iraqis were displaced and sought refuge in the northern region of Iraq, with little more than the clothes on their backs. With such an overwhelming situation, it's easy to ignore the problem and pretend that these atrocities don't exist. If one part suffers, we all suffer. If we fail to stand up for others, when will it end? Shy Fund stands up for freedom. We provide emergency response, medical aid, post-traumatic care, anti-trafficking initiatives, school feeding, education programs, and job creation. By standing up for what's right, we can make a difference. By helping others, we can protect the most vulnerable. By educating our children, we can change the world. Stand with Shy Fund and be a voice for freedom and justice.
So we go into these areas where the Christians have been bombed like they were here by radical Islamists.
As the battle over Ephraim grew,
And we help them when they're fleeing, when they are able, if they are able to return. We help them when they have left and gone into neighboring countries. And we help them all along the route, wherever they are and whatever is happening to them. So for example, I'm going to start with what's happening in Syria because it's been all over the news. You probably know that Turkey has invaded Syria, and the Islamic State, who had come through both Syria and Iraq and occupied that area, they declared it a caliphate, or a religious kingdom of Sunni Islam. And in their search for religious purity, they made the Christians and other religious and ethnic minorities leave the area. And how did they do that? They did it by telling them they had three choices. You can convert to Islam, you can leave, or they will kill you and behead you. And so the Christian community fled en masse. And what's happening now again in Syria is that this time Turkey has taken those same radical Islamic groups that were linked with Al-Qaeda and ISIS and has used them as their ground forces to attack the Christian community in Syria. And in the area that we're working predominantly, it's North Syria. They had about 125,000 Christians pre-ISIS, and now that whole community is on the run. Worse still, many of those people were survivors of the 1914 Turkish genocide against the Armenian Christians. These are the great-grandchildren of the survivors of that genocide, who are now being attacked again by Turkey in Syria. And I have constantly getting updates on my phone from the Christians in Syria, and they are telling me that they have left all of the Christian villages, that these radical Islamic groups have gone in and marked their homes as now being the ownership of these radical groups. They have looted all of the belongings in the homes. If they have businesses, they've looted all the items in the businesses. And just in the last 48 hours, I received an update from the Christians living there that some of them who had big farming fields, and that the produce, I think it was rye, was ready to be harvested. They've lost that, and these groups have taken it, harvested it, and are selling it for themselves. Where those Christians have run, they've had to leave, because when they've come into this area, they have exactly the same ISIS ideology. They come in with the intent to kill them. They've announced it on social media. And so I'm going to play you a video of what has happened and how they've managed to get rid of many of the Christians on the more western side of North Syria, and so that you can understand what that looks like. If you could play the Afrin video.
This land.
They predate Islam by 7 centuries. It's not this one. It's the one before. In fact, many of these Christians, even...
Number 2.
It's number 2. It's called Afrin.
As the battle over Ephraim grew closer to the city, many Christians found themselves in grave danger. This is a church service of the Christians crying out to God for deliverance as Turkish and Islamic forces drove towards Ephraim. Charmaine Heading, the founder of the Shai Fund, helping the persecuted church in the Middle East, kept in touch with many of these Christians.
A lot of information was coming to them that when these different people who came in, who support this radical Islamic ideology that we've seen with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that they would behead the Christians and they would kill them. And because many of these Christians were originally Muslim background believers, they were particularly going to be targeted.
CBN News has also learned of an added danger. Jihadists broke into the church, found pictures of some believers, and distributed them. They're now hunting them down door to door.
They say our situation is very dangerous and we don't know what to do because they found photos in the church building, and he said they are searching for the believers now in Afrin. So he's the man, he's crying, he don't know what to do, so we need to really pray that God to protect him.
Heading says most of the Christian families have found safe haven, but says the church in the West needs to pray for its fellow believers in distress.
They should pray for their safety. They should pray that these families will be able to stay together, because in these chronically desperate situations when masses of people are fleeing, families can get lost and little ones can get hurt. So we need to pray for these families, that they'll be able to stay together.
Kamal Sito of the Society for Threatened Peoples told CBN News the West needs to help.
USA Christians have to help Kurds in North Syria, as in Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. It's very, very important to support Kurdish people in this situation, to protect Kurds, because we need Kurds as allies in the fighting against radical idea in Middle East.
Heading says what is taking place in Afrin is ethnic cleansing on a massive scale.
We know from what the statements that they've made that they want to get rid of the people in this area and bring in other people from Syria. So it's a population displacement.
Following the battle over Ephraim, many Middle East observers feel Turkey and these Islamic groups will continue to expand and try to conquer more territory.
Charmaine, thanks for joining us here at Jerusalem
Okay,
Dateline.
stop. It's always an honor to be here, Chris. Yeah. So what happened was they went in, they attacked the Christians that were living in this area of Syria, and we got notification immediately that they were being attacked. What was specifically dangerous for these specific Christians in Afrin was that they were all Muslims who'd had dreams and visions of Jesus, and they were now believers and had had a congregation in this area where they'd been very peacefully worshipping Jesus, and the community church, very much like this one, had pictures of all of the members of the community on the church, and they were hiding out in the church when I got the notification that they were in Afrin. They knew that these radical groups might attack. They didn't know exactly when. And then we heard that they had started bombing and they ran. And as soon as they ran, we mobilized. We got humanitarian aid, and we had different points where we knew that they were going to come to once they got out of the zone where they were being hunted down. And so we waited for them with medicine, we waited with clothing, we waited with emergency aid, with mattresses, and they had to go live in temporary shelters. So this was about approximately in Easter last year, those Christians have never been able to return back to Afrin. They have been displaced and are not able. We've tried to help them to get resettled. But what did happen was they got into the church, they got the photographs, and they went from door to door in this town, pretty much the same, probably about the same size as McMinnville, and hunted each of those Christians down, trying to find them and to look for them in order to kill them. Because under Islam, if you were a Muslim and you believe in Jesus, it's apostasy, and for that, it's the death penalty. And so they were going to behead them. Now, one of the families didn't make it out. And it so happened that I got the message that they were stuck, and only by the grace of God, I was with someone who knew someone in the military, and we were able to coordinate where they were and send in a team to extract them, and we got them out. So that's the kind of work that we do. We've been working with the Christian community in this whole area because of the constant assaults and attacks on them by either radical groups like ISIS, or in this case it's by Turkey using these mercenaries to attack them and to make sure that the Christian community is totally expunged from this area. It's a genocide for them. And when Turkey invaded, we knew that it was going to be bad, and so we again mobilized and got ready with humanitarian aid and medicines and mattresses, and again getting ready for the Christian community that we knew would probably have to flee if the international community didn't step in. They didn't, and so I decided to go on television, and some of you have seen, this was about 2 weeks, it was the Saturday before I left Israel. I went on CBN and decided that I would start talking about what is happening to raise the awareness on what's happening to the Christians in North Syria. Subsequently, I'm on Turkey's blacklist and probably will never be able to even fly through Turkey. But I feel it's worth it. We need to stand up and count and speak out for our brothers and sisters in Christ. So if you could play video number 3, Jerusalem Dateline, on what's happening in Syria now, today as we speak.
Charmaine, thanks for joining us here at Jerusalem Dateline.
It's always an honor to be here, Chris.
Yeah. We have 2 maps here right now, and talk about the land that a lot of people are referring to, but as you say, tell us what this land actually is.
So this is North Syria, and this is the area that's been proposed as the buffer zone where you have the red. And where you have all the purple dots are all the ancient Christian villages, people who speak Aramaic, the same language Jesus spoke. They all live along this so-called buffer zone.
So the conventional wisdom is this is all Kurdish land, this is YPG, but you're saying this goes back 2,000 years of Christians living in this land.
They predate Islam by 7 centuries here. This is their ancient homeland. In fact, many of these Christians, even worse, are survivors of the 1915 Armenian genocide that were put on the first death marches from Turkey into this area of Syria. These are Christian lands. It's also Kurdish lands. It's also Arab tribes, and there's also Yazidis that live here. This is not just a Kurdish area.
Right now, we're talking about danger for Christians that are right now in the line of fire. We're talking about Tel Tamar right here.
Yes.
Tell us what's going on right now.
So as you can see, Tel Tamar area is way outside the so-called agreed buffer zone. So the question we're all asking is, how come Turkey is allowed to bring their jihadi troops in the so-called national army, which is made up of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, FSA, and other ideological radicalized Islamist groups, into this area where there's been well-documented human rights abuses against minorities or religious minorities like the Christian and the Yazidis, or what the Turks are calling all over social media infidels, you and me.
So we're having ethnic cleansing here. The House of Representatives in the U.S. just voted to recognize the Armenian genocide. what's happening right now?
It's kind of hypocritical to recognize the Armenian genocide that's happened when you've got Assyrians, Armenians, and Christians that are living all along here, and they are running for their lives right now as we are sitting here today, because these Turkish armies are attacking them and are coming into this area in order to ethnically cleanse the area of all of the so-called infidels.
You see there's a historical parallel to what's happening right now. What is that?
I think that what we have done as the West is that we have given over this so-called buffer zone to Turkey in the hope for peace in our time, just like Chamberlain did to Nazi Germany with the Sudetenland. And we know what happened after that. 6 million Jews died. And we are looking at the same thing happening, another genocide of Christians, Kurds, and Yazidis in this area. We have lost the moral clarity.
And quickly, Charmaine, what can be done?
We need to stop Turkey from flying into this area. America controls the skies. We need to declare a no-fly zone. We need to move troops into this area and protect the religious minorities. For those of us who say never again, not on our watch, it's happening. We have to call. This is the time to make a call and to say to our leaders, our people in authority, protect our Christians, protect the Kurds, protect the people in these lands.
Well, Charmaine, thanks for your expertise and your insight and your passion about the people here. Thank you.
You can get involved and you can support us with this initiative. We are moving at this time containers of aid into the Christian community. There's 5 schools where the Christians are living at the moment, and we are moving the aid into those areas right now. For example, we've got someone who's offered to give us medicines and blankets, big donations, and all we have to pay for is, for example, the transport into this area. So at the moment we've got about over $200,000 worth of medicines going in, and it's only costing us $10,000 to get it in. So this is the kind of thing that we can help and get involved because this is happening right now today. I'd now like to turn to Iraq, because the situation in Iraq is not currently as much on our radar, but the situation there has also been chronically difficult for the Christian community. In the year 2000, for example, there was 1.5 million Christians in Iraq. Today, there's less than 120,000. The Christian community in Iraq was attacked by ISIS, and we probably heard about that in 2014 when it came on our screens. But the persecution of the church there started happening a long time before that. So it's been this slow genocide and slow systematic process of attacking the churches, kidnapping and torturing the priests, kidnapping lay people, kidnapping women and girls, and harassing the Christian community in Iraq, until finally, when ISIS attacked the Nineveh plains of Iraq, which is the same Nineveh that you read about in your Bible. It's the communities there of Christians speak Aramaic, the same language that Jesus spoke, and they have churches there that have been there for thousands of years. Their churches, for example, have Aramaic. All over the churches, their holy Bibles and their worship is in Aramaic. Their graveyards are in Aramaic on the tombstones. And this community, which was 1.5 million, is now reduced down in our time to less than 125,000. And when ISIS came in, they said to the Christians, you have these 3 choices: convert to Islam, or you can pay a jizya, which is like a form of an extortion tax for being a Christian in Islamic lands. And so what they do is they say, well, pay the tax and then we will give you protection. But what they did was, some of the people then said, okay, we'll pay, because it's something that Islam, it's written in the Quran, something that Islam has done throughout the centuries, where people like you and me who are Christians who are living under Islamic rule, in order to have our businesses protected and not vandalized, in order to have our churches and to be able to operate and live, have to pay a tax, a jizya, to the Islamic authorities. And so they paid it. And about 8 days later, they still got attacked and were told, either convert or you will die by the sword. And many of them did. In fact, when I arrived in Iraq just a few weeks after the Christian community of the Nineveh Plains, there's a number of different villages in this area that had the Christians living with beautiful churches. When I arrived and I met one of the families that had fled the area, and they were in a church, and I always tell the story because the mother said to me, "You in the West, you've forgotten us. Don't forget us. I'm going to tell you my story, and I can't speak, but you can go for me and speak and tell it." And I said to her, "What's your story?" And she was in a church about this size. She'd come from the Nineveh Plains. They had been bombed and attacked. They had fled, but her sons didn't make it out with other members of the community. And so she now was in an area in northern Iraq. She was living in a church. They'd moved out all the chairs in the church. They put mattresses down in the church so that the people could sleep at night. And then in the day, they would move those mattresses to the sides of the church. So I'm standing in the middle of the church, and she's crying. And the mattresses are all surrounding us, and there's children and women, and they're desperate. No one had come to help them. And they'd lost everything in the Nineveh Plains. They didn't know what had happened, but they knew that the Islamic State was going to destroy them. And she said to me, "My two sons were caught. One was an engineer, and they just beheaded him. My other son was a doctor. And for that son, because he was a doctor, they decided to keep him so that he could help with the Islamic State fighters that were coming off the front lines." And she said to me that when she eventually reached her son and she managed to speak to him, he told her that the first night in the room that he was kept in was covered in blood of his brothers and his family members, and he had to put his shoes under his head so that the blood of his family didn't soak into his hair. After 3 years, they managed to expel the Islamic State. And that first video that you saw was when it was still a militarized zone, and I managed to get in because by this point I'd done significant humanitarian aid into the area, about over $1 million worth of aid into the area, where we'd help them with blankets and food. And they eventually went into, because it was 3 years, they eventually went into some form of like camps, and the camps had cholera and polio epidemics, and we'd gone in and redone all the water systems, and we'd helped them in every way that we could to survive while they were in exile. And so when eventually it got cleared, they said to me, "Come back with us and come and see with us what's happening. Come with us so that you can witness it for us." And I took in a video team from Kentucky. They were scared stiff, but they came, and we went into that deserted town of the Nineveh Plains, and it was like a ghost city. They had systematically, the Islamic State, gone from house to house of the Christians and blown up every single house. They'd gone into every single church and blown up every single church. And if there was a picture of Jesus or Mary, they had beheaded it and left it as a sign for the Christians of what they would do if the Christian community came back. They then took all of their Bibles and religious texts and hymn books, and they burnt them. They then went across all of the churches where there's a church steeple, and they blew it up because they cannot have the sign of the cross over any of their area that they controlled. And then they went into the graveyards, and they opened all the graves, and they scattered the bones of the people so that the wild dogs could eat them, because they were trying to eradicate the history and identity, language, and who the Christian community really was. And when they knew that they had to leave Iraq and this area of the Nineveh Plains as the coalition forces pushed them back, they booby-trapped the whole area. So when we went in, we had to be very careful. I went in with Christians who had joined the Peshmerga, which is part of the Kurdish fighting forces, and we had to be very careful. We knew which roads had been cleared and what areas had been cleared, and we went in. And there was no one there. You can see it was a ghost town. Nothing at all, because everyone was scared to go back. But they had to go back because there was nowhere else for them to go. And they were living in refugee camps in the north and in other areas. And I looked at the situation and I said, how are you going to ever go back? There's no electricity. There's no running water. Your buildings and your properties are totally destroyed. And they said to me, will you help them? And I said, yes, I'll help you. And so we got in and we looked at the situation, and I thought, well, I come from a business background, and I thought, well, the best thing that we can do is to try and get the businesses up and running, because if they have a business and they're able to make money, and if we do really practical businesses like window fitting or mechanic stores or things that you need in order to rebuild your city, this is probably the most effective way of getting people back into work with dignity, but also to help them rebuild and to change the economy of these towns. So we went in and we did the first 2 businesses in the area. First of all, we did a bakery, because if you go down there in the Nineveh Plains where no one had gone and you're working, you need to eat. And secondly, we did a mechanic store because it's in the desert. And so when we had to get in, we had to get out. We had a lot of problems with the cars, and we had to truck in everything that we needed. So we started off trucking in what we needed for the businesses. So for example, for the mechanic store, we had to truck in a generator because there was no electricity. So we went in, we repaired the store, we repaired we brought in the generator, we trucked everything in and all the tools that they opened and needed for their business. So I'm going to show you a short video now on the projects that we've done. We've done over 15 businesses in the Nineveh Plains, in this area where ISIS attacked them. And for example, they're about medium-sized businesses, so they employ 5 men approximately in each business, or women, and each of those represents a family. So it can be up to 30 people that each business supports, and we've got another 15 that are about to go in. Take a look at the livelihoods.
Today, less than 250,000 Christians live in Iraq, a decline of over 80% since 2003. Persecuted for their beliefs, they were driven from their homes, fleeing overnight in fear of what ISIS would do to them and their families. For years, they've been displaced and exiled in their own country, living in temporary shelters with no food, no status, and few options. These shelters have been disbanded, and they're now forced to return home.
Many of the families want to return, but they need that spark of hope. They need someone to come alongside them and to assist them with building their businesses, with cleaning out their homes, and just to be able to give them their livelihoods back. Without work, you cannot sustain your family, and your community won't be economically viable.
ISIS has been pushed out, and basic infrastructure has been restored, but there's little work, and parents are struggling to provide for their children. Shy Fund exists to give hope to persecuted families and communities during this dark season by investing in businesses that were thriving before the ISIS invasion. Each grant funds essential equipment needed to successfully relaunch these businesses. Shy Fund's job creation program has already launched many small businesses, including medical clinics, pathology labs, grocery stores, bakeries, window replacement services, mini markets, restaurants, a mechanic shop, and more. And it's working. Dozens of families are now being supported. Each small business represents lives restarted, children back in school, families fed, poverty alleviated, and a community of people beginning to rebuild and thrive again. But this is just the start. There's more to do. Over 30 families and their businesses are approved and ready to reopen. Moms and dads, kids and grandparents, ready to leave temporary shelters, move home, and get to work. People who look forward to supporting themselves, their families, and their communities again. With your help, we can bring these families home. Join us in sponsoring a small business today.
You can get involved by sponsoring a small business. With between $5,000 to $7,000 sponsors one small business that supports many people, family members, and they're able to go back and to be able to survive in the Nineveh plains. So you can see what it looks like. It's completely destroyed. And so it's really important that we go in there and stand with them and support them, not only prayerfully, but also practically. Finally, I'd like to talk about Egypt. It's the third country I'll speak about today. We're involved with many countries in the Middle East, but I won't do all of them. So the last one I'll do is Egypt. I actually go into Egypt for the Coptic Christmas, which Christmas Eve for them is on the 6th of January. And because we're running a number of projects in Egypt. Now, the Egyptian church, of the 5% of Christians that are left in the Middle East, about half of them are represented by the Egyptian Coptic Church. So that's about 8 million people that are in Egypt, and they are under huge pressure. We see very similar patterns with what happened in Iraq, in Egypt, that's happening now at the moment. For example, in Egypt, you might have heard in Palm Sunday 2015, in one of the big cathedrals in Alexandria, which was one of the really early bases of the early church, the patristic fathers. There's a big church there, a big cathedral, and radical elements went in there with a suicide bomb and blew themselves up, and another 45 people were killed and many were injured. It happened on Palm Sunday, and they all had the palms that they make out of palm leaves, the palm fronds, into the shape of the cross. And I'll never forget the pictures that I was sent from the community in Alexandria of the blood and body parts of the martyrs on the ground with the Palm Sunday fronds. They also have monasteries out in the desert that are more obviously difficult to get to, where the Christian community travels out to, and they do retreats and other events that they hold there, and it's very easy target for these radical groups who know that the time of year that they're coming. So you've probably also heard of the children's buses with Coptic Christians who were out to go to a project that they were doing as part of their Sunday school, and they were blown up. The Christian community there, in particular in two areas, in Alminia and in Sute, which are in central Egypt, are under huge pressure. And what we found is that there are radical groups within the mosques that are paying up to $4,000 to kidnap a girl, especially from a prominent Christian family, rape her, film it on social media, and then blackmail her or her family to convert to Islam. It's something that we see also in Pakistan, but the levels of this kind of assault on the Christian community, and in specific, the young women and girls that are at the age when they should be getting married and having children, is a very targeted, systematic attempt to destroy the Christian community and their ability to have families in this area of Egypt. And so that's where we work, and it's dangerous. But we go in there and we support some of these girls. So for example, this year alone, we've had 2 workshops in both of these 2 areas of 100 girls each, where we've spoken to the families, to the girls themselves, and we work with the churches and other grassroots society organizations, faith-based organizations, in order to run prevention programs to be able to identify what's happening, how the girls are getting kidnapped, what the patterns look like, so that we can try and warn the community so that they can identify it when it's happening and see the threat. Also, in the areas where the Christian community is very poor, because they are excluded from being able to take government jobs because they are a Christian, or you can't apply for a job and someone else who might apply and because you're a Christian, you won't get the job. So you have a lot of poverty in this area. Added to this with the Christian girls, because it's so dangerous, if you've got 1 or 2 Christian families in a small village and she has to walk to school, the chances of her getting picked up and kidnapped are huge. And so sometimes the families don't let the girls go to school after they've reached puberty, and so you have a lot of poverty and illiteracy. So we're trying to work with these areas with the girls and women that have been targeted and have been taken, are being kidnapped, and have either been raped or have been abused. There's a variety of things that have been happening with these girls. In fact, just yesterday I got a text message, because they know I'm coming into Egypt in 2 weeks' time, saying to me there's a young woman who was in one of our seminars, but she unfortunately got taken, and they've taken photographs of her, and they're now trying to force her through blackmail, to convert to Islam. And so I would like to show a movie, a short clip again, of what the situation is in Egypt today and why we are working in Egypt.
Egyptian Christians. This time it's the funeral of a beloved Coptic priest. Islamist gunmen opened fire on Father Mina Aboud July 6th as he drove his car after an afternoon of shopping in the northern Sinai town of El Arish. Father Mina's murder comes of no surprise to Egypt's Christians. They're frequent targets of attack during times of political instability. Christians have struggled for years not only to protect their churches, homes, and businesses, but also their daughters.
One of the challenges facing Christian families here, particularly in Upper Egypt, is the kidnapping of young Christian girls. It generally happens when the girls enter their teen years. So what are families to do about this? Some move away to Christian villages, relocating. But with that comes a whole new set of challenges.
Manel moved her family from a Muslim village to a Christian one near Almenia. She wanted to protect her oldest daughter, Mariam, from abduction and forced conversion. She made the decision after noticing some Muslim girls and boys attempting to lure Mariam away from her family and faith.
The girls used to tell Mariam, "Come with us, we will give you some money. You are having a hard life." The young boys were sending the young girls to do this. I feared they would kidnap her and then demand a lot of money to return her, or they would return her and she wouldn't be in the same way as they took her.
Now, residing as strangers in a new town, her husband has difficulty finding work.
I am much happier now because it's safe for my daughters here, but the working opportunities for my husband are little because few people know my husband.
Miriam's family borrowed money to buy food and make their house payment. They prayed God would provide help. She and her family are not alone. Last year, a Helsinki Commission hearing revealed the number of disappearances and abduction of Christian girls is increasing. Human trafficking expert Michelle Clark told of more than 800 cases. Still, many Islamic leaders and government officials debunk claims that Christian girls are being trafficked. They insist the conversions and marriages are not forced. They're simply the result of amorous love between young people of different faiths. Helmi El Sayed is Freedom and Justice Party Secretary for Giza.
A boy and a girl from different religions love each other, and thus one of them converts his religion in order to get married. The problem is that families do not accept that. Also, the two religions, neither the church accepts any of its people to Islam because of love, nor Islam accepts this type of conversion.
Sayed claims it's a social problem that must be addressed, not a religious one. Earlier this year, the Coptic Orthodox Patriarch told me that efforts to prevent trafficking and forced conversions often fail.
This is a very sensitive issue for us. We try with the government, with the local authorities. Sometimes we success, but sometimes no success.
The Morsi government did little to curtail the trafficking. Political change gives many Egyptian Christians hope. They pray the next government will force police to treat Christian kidnapping complaints seriously. They also want to see the government prosecute the kidnappers. As for Miriam and her family, their prayers for help were answered. CBN provided them with the seed money needed to start a small clothing business.
My daughters and I will tell people in the church that we sell new clothing, and the profits we get will help buy clothes for my children and feed my family. May the American Christians who help us have a long life, and may God be with them to help others like me to become self-supporting.
Help that brings a glimmer of hope and a new beginning in Egypt.
So we're working, as I said, with about 200 of these young women and girls that have either been taken or were attempted to be lured. And in addition to that, because once this has happened to them, they have very little prospects. It's very dangerous for them to be outside in the open, especially if the community knows that the girl was taken, and the Christian community goes to the police and asks them to help, and many times they won't get involved and they won't help. In fact, what happens is when there is a dispute between the Christian population and someone who is taking the girls, the police tend to put the Christians in prison for their own safety. Or if there's a problem in the community with the church and something that's happened with members of the community of that church, and there's then the Muslims will often riot outside of that area, they will go in and close down the church because they say that they can't protect the church. So in a lot of these areas, it's the Christian community that is taking a lot of the persecution and the hits if there's a problem. And I'll give you one example. There was a Christian family that I went and I spoke to the last time I was in Egypt, and they told me the following story. It was an elderly woman. She was a grandmother, and she had 2 sons, and her sons had an electronics store. And some of the local community, Muslim community from Egypt, came in and bought some products from these gentlemen and then refused to pay. And when the Christians went to the police and filed charges, these 2 men riled up members of the village, and they started to create an issue in the village, and the police then took the 2 men and put them in prison because part of what these Muslim men said was that they were causing trouble and that they were dating Muslim girls. Now, these are 2 married Christian men, and they weren't doing that. It was just to incite violence against the Christian family that they didn't want to pay for the electronic goods. And then they went to the Christian store and they burnt it down. And then they went to the family home, and there they found the daughters and the grandmother, and they raped the daughters, and then they stripped the grandmother naked and they threw her out onto the street. And then they burnt the house down. And then the grandmother was telling me the story, and she said to me, I will not leave Egypt because I want to be a voice and I want to tell everyone what is happening here. For my children, they need to leave, and they've had to leave. But for her, she says, I'm going to stand, she said, because I am not scared. I would rather die declaring my faith than to run away at this point in my life. And then she said, and I know that Jesus is with me, and I'll tell you why. When she went naked down the street, knocking on her neighbors' doors, asking them to cover her and to let her in. And eventually one of the families did let her in. And she said to them, and some of the people afterwards, did you see what happened? And they said to her, no, we could not see your nakedness because there was a light shining all around you. God's heart is for the persecuted. And I do believe that the call at this time is for us who are still free and have a voice in the West to stand up and support them because their blood cries out. The people of the cross are on their knees in some of these areas, and we need to be with them, not just peripherally, but also practically. And I know everyone can't go, but there are different organizations, myself included, that go, and we are able to stand with them and be there, listen to their stories, and then bring it back to you here in McMinnville. We can change a person's life. For some of these girls that have been taken in Egypt for $1,000, we set them up in a business. This year alone, we've set up 45 businesses in Egypt. We've had workshops for over 200 girls. These workshops cost about $10,000, and we're able to go and make a significant change in this area. You can get involved and support these kinds of projects that support the persecuted church in this area. And they know where it comes from. They know that it's people in the West that are caring and standing up for them, because if we don't, no one else will. So like that woman who, even though they are suffering, she knew that Jesus was with her. I believe that this is what we need to be, the hands and feet of Jesus. And that's why I feel so passionate and so called to stand with them at this time. And I ask you to join me and do the same. At the back of the church, there's little cross bracelets that were made by the Coptic Christian girls in Egypt. Take one and remember the persecuted church and pray for them. Thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you.
Any questions? Yes.
I just want to say that when she says we go into these places, it means just her. You need to know that, and you need to know as well that just about a month ago, the Shy Fund received a prestigious international award called the Aurora Awards. And this Aurora Award is given to non-profits who step in to save minorities and groups, in this case the Christian world, from genocide and distress. It's an international award, and one of the benefactors is a guy called George Clooney and other big donors toward it. And she became a joint recipient of it. She didn't win it herself, she won it with another organization. But the significance of this is that you don't get an award like that simply because you do something. They actually called for her financial reports. They examined the non-profit from top to bottom. The accountants in Murfreesboro, where this non-profit is registered, and I think that's an honor for us, that it's registered here in Tennessee, had to submit to the Aurora authorities all her financial statements. They wanted to see her participation quota, vis-a-vis money that people give and how much is actually used to go to the end user. And they decided that she would be a joint winner because of the impeccable nature of the non-profit, and because she actually goes in to make sure that donor money is given to the right people, and thus is accountable to the donors. So anyone who gives to the Shy Fund, because of this incredible award that she has received, can give with confidence, knowing that their donations will be used for the very reasons that they submitted. God bless you.
Bless you, brother.
Any questions? I love questions. So anything. I like talking about all this. Yes.
How are you protecting people that you set up in businesses, like in Egypt and...
Yeah. So you know the story about Jesus being born in Bethlehem and he was born in the stable. Well, actually, it's the inn or the houses there where they live are on the top floor, and underneath they have people, their animals. And so what we do is we work predominantly what we call in the informal business sector, where we do businesses that we can operate from home, and they've done really well. I go in now to check on these 45 businesses, but we've had every 3 months we've got someone going in and we're checking on them. But for example, one of the businesses that we do is goats, and so we raise goats. We give them a nanny goat and some baby goats, and then we have a system where we work within the community through the church mostly, where once those goats have grown up, we take them and we sell them. And goat meat is very, very, very lucrative, and all the big festivities, they use this kind of meat, so it's actually very profitable. And the gestation period is about, once we're able to get the goats grown up, it's about 3 months, so the turnover is pretty fast. And once we know that they can do that, then we're able to add to their flock and see how many they can cope with. Or we do, and so that's easy because it's taking the goats to the abattoir, and so there's not a lot of interaction, and it's very safe for them to do that from their home. The other type of business that we do in some areas where we're able to is we do what we call a dry goods kiosk. So if they're in an area that and it's a family home, and we know that there's men and others that are there with them, we're able to set up a kiosk with dry goods. So it's like tea, sugar, coffee, those kinds of things. And then once we know that they're able to manage, and we train them, we do training with them on how to manage the stock and the profit and restocking the produce, and they're able to cope with it, then we look at how we can extend it. And so one of the ways that we extended it, for example, is into fresh produce. So one of the girls, very successful, her whole family has got involved in the business, which is great because we believe in family. God's in the family business. And so the families got involved, and I got a call from them. They'd gone from dry goods to fresh produce, and they said to me, "Can we have a donkey?" I said to them, "What are you going to do with the donkey?" They said to me, "The father takes the produce out. People call in and say, 'I want this, this, and this,' and then he puts it on his donkey and takes it out and delivers it." So we do things like that to grow it. Or if we know that they have a good electrical source and they're able to maintain, we're able to put in a freezer, because it's very easy then to have frozen goods because it's a longer shelf life and it's not so difficult to manage. So we've got different models that we use like that have been successful. Or if it's an area, we've also done sheep, but if it's an area where we know that it's a little bit more dangerous, then we will do, one of the things that we've done is a sewing machine, and we've taught them how to sew. And one of the items that does very well is actually sheets. Now you say, why sheets? Because in a poor area, sheets can be used for anything. It's not just a sheet, it can be used as a curtain, it can be used to cover or divide a room. There's many, many things that you can do with that. So, many things like that. And so then we have an outlet that they can sell it. So it depends on the situation, and we look very closely at what her situation is, how much risk is involved, and how much support we can give. And with all of the projects that we run, we make sure that we run it through the local community, by the local community, and 90% of the time it's with the church, because we believe in supporting the churches and the communities themselves so that they can become sustainable. So I use the trainer model, where I go in and I train them on how to manage the businesses. So one person might have a portfolio of 12 businesses or 25 businesses, and then they train them on the stock and how to manage the budgets, and then they report back to me on any problems or what's happened. And we have, like of the 45 businesses, we had one that didn't work. It was a young girl that was at risk, but her mother was a beggar. And we bought a dry good kiosk, and the mother said, "No, it's too much work, I prefer begging." And so they gave it up. So the ratio that we expect for failure of these businesses is about 1 in 8. And at the moment in Egypt, because our model is very, very tight, it's very community-based, we've had 1 in 45. And we've been, we took back the goods and we sold what we could, and we've used that to help someone else. Other questions? All right. Yes, for that.
I was wondering, is there a news source that you would say that we would get the most accurate information about what's going on over there?
Good question.
It's difficult. I mean, I work with these communities, so I get a lot of it on the ground myself. But I do have a newsletter that you can sign up for at the back. And there's a latest edition that's out on the bench on the right side as you go out. You can grab one of those. And if you sign up either online or with a card, there's a little info card that you can sign up for our newsletters. We do put out news on what's going on, what the situation is, and we give background to all of the countries that we operate in. Yes.
Since you began working in these areas, how far has international recognition of this genocide progressed?
I think a lot of people, it's been, look, I'll be honest with you, it's been hard. It's been really, really difficult. We also get a lot of resistance from big international NGOs, the UNHCR and others who are supposed to do a lot of the protection of the Christian community just don't do it. And there's a number of reasons for that, because Christians, for example, when they have to leave their homes and go to another country and they end up in a refugee camp, they can't stay in those refugee camps because they are treated the same as what they are treated at home. The very reasons that they had to flee in the refugee camps. So, for example, there are refugee camps in Jordan where the Christians can't stay. And so the UN and some of these big non-faith but big multilaterals supported by many governments who go and they only operate in these refugee camps. So basically the Christians are then victims twice because they can't get access into the camps, they don't get shelter, they have to find shelter somewhere else, they rely on churches and faith-based NGOs to come in and help them. And so when we talk about what's happened, you know, a lot of the UN and others, they say, well, that's not our experience. And I was like, and I always say, yes, but if you only work with that one portion of the population, it's not going to be your experience. And so that's why it's important that as many of us speak up and be a voice, show videos. The USA did recognize it, and it was a big push. We were very involved with the push. Kerry recognized the genocide in Iraq and Syria with the Christians and some of the other minorities like the Yazidis. You might have heard, I work a lot with the Yazidis as well. The Yazidi girls were taken as well as Christian girls as sex slaves by ISIS and sold in sex markets in Raqqa and in Mosul. I mean, it's just unbelievable what happened to them, over 6,000 of them. And there's many of them that we still don't know where they are. But it's an uphill struggle.
I've heard a lot, with all these things going on, all the different countries, all the Muslims that we brought into the U.S. and other groups, but not Christians, being brought here. Is there any changes going on that and more assistance for it? Because I think it's pitiful that I believe the countries that are a particular group, that their majority is a particular religion, that's where you would think you would want them to be because they would be able to integrate better into that country. And so, why aren't we taking more Christians here?
I think part of that problem is that the UNHCR, so the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, is the international governing body that is supposed to identify who qualifies as a refugee under the 1951 refugee law. And then they make recommendations to the different countries on who should be accepted as a refugee. Now, in the case of why are we getting so little refugees, it's really clear to us why. Because if the UN and all of them are only working in refugee camps, and it's not safe for Christians to be in those camps, which it's not, they are not. They're Muslim mostly Muslim refugees in those camps. The Christians can't stay in those camps. And so what's happening is they only are working in the camps and identifying people from those camps. And so that's why a lot of the refugees coming through into our Western countries have not been Christian. And we would have to make a dedicated program to assist the victims of genocide. And the problem that we have then is that in some weird contortion, we're told, well, no, you can't be specific in who you help. And I always say to people, well, listen, 6 million Jews died after World War II. And if you came to me and said to me, which was what basically they did, we're not going to help the people who've suffered the genocide because then we're being very specific on who we're helping. I'm like, that's the reason that we had the 1951 Refugee Convention, and that's the very reason why we have the existence of the UNHCR. But you have to be able to fight this in the very left-wing media who says, no, we can't single out one group against each other. Yes, we can. That's what it is.
They are. They're specifically choosing Muslims to bring here.
Well, that's what happens when we don't do it. I believe that unless we as Christians stand up and go and speak to our senators and our congressmen, and until we are on the streets demonstrating and saying this is an issue that we care about, the governments across the Western world won't care. There's an activist in me. But we need to get up on our feet, and we need to be the ones that are saying this is our issue, and we won't vote for you unless you vote on this issue like we want this. That's what democracy is. Thank God we live in one. Let's use it. Yes.
Yes, I see this on kind of three levels. Certainly we should pressure our leaders to have the right policies and things and support groups like yours and help groups like yours. But also I think on a bigger level, the real change is going to come in the Muslim world through missions. And I'm always curious, is there any viable missional work going on in those places? Are there any groups, and how can we pray for that and support that?
Yeah, there is. I mean, that's part of that video that you saw on Afrin was Muslim background believers that we're supporting who are evangelizing then their own people and telling them about Jesus, and they are able to then convert and believe before Turkey is attacked. Now that Turkey is attacked, they will shut that down and they won't allow that. And so yes, it is. It's on multiple levels. You know, if we don't work with our politicians and say, hey, Turkey's committing human rights abuses and the new Ottoman Caliphate is about to ethnically cleanse and kill all the Christians in this area, then who will? Yes.
Do you think that creating independent states for the persecuted Christians in the Middle East would solve or at least alleviate the matter?
So there's a mixed feeling about that. If you, on one hand, because, for example, in Iraq, there's 125,000 Christians left, and the Christian community says, don't put us in an area of where we can be in one area, because then we're going to be an easy target and we can't defend ourselves. Because they're Christian, they're not allowed to integrate into the army, they're not able to go into the police force, etc. There's a lot of issues with them being able to integrate. So what we're doing instead, we have to look at the situation and go, okay, let's see if we can put pressure on the Iraqi government to reform and allow the Christians to be part of their own police force in their areas, and to have areas where there are more of them, that they can work out some kind of more democratic and inclusive form of governance and participation in these areas. But there's a lot of backlash because the Baghdad government doesn't want them to create semi-autonomous regions. And I have to be honest with you, that's the travesty of what's happened in northeast Syria. Northeast Syria was the democratic autonomous region of northeast Syria. It constituted 30% of Syria, And it was an absolute model for inclusiveness. It had human rights, freedom of religion. You could have Kurds who believed in Jesus, who had a church there in Afrin. And Turkey has gone in and has destroyed that. And we've let that happen. So the very only viable model that was working is now destroyed on our watch. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've heard a lot of information tonight, and Charmaine, I would ask, what is the greatest need?
Well, the greatest need, for example, now is in Syria, where the Christian community is on the run. Literally, they're serving in churches like this and in schools.
And with that being the greatest need, how can we as a community here meet needs there? What is our response need?
Well, we should pray for them. We can raise awareness in our country, in our government, but also to give practically. And we can support a program like this with Shaifa. You can go onto our website, you can go to Syria, and that funding will go to help those Christians in Syria today.
So what I hear you saying is a threefold plan would be to raise awareness of Syria within our own community, in our own country, in our own land, through our senators and our representatives. And then two would be to, I guess first would be to pray. Yeah, first would be to pray. We don't need to put it in that order. But to adamantly pray for those that are there, like you and other organizations that are on the ground there, but also for the persecuted believers. Second would be to raise awareness in our communities. And third would be able to give so that you can meet the practical needs. The practical needs turn into spiritual blessings and things like that. So you have to meet them physically. Now, you do have a donation jar out there on the bench, right? And you do have the bracelets there. And I don't know how we typically do this, but I would ask that if you want to be part of that that third benefit that we talked about in meeting that will go back to the Shai Fund, right? So as you're going out, we would very much appreciate if God's laid it on your heart to, if they want to put a check in there, we would then make that out too.
To Shai Fund, or they can make it out to the church and then you go to Shai Fund directly online, do a credit card, or a check, and put it in the donation box there, or they can come later and do it.
Okay, so there's several ways you can do that. You can go to their website, which there's a newsletter out there that's got the information there, and you can give through your credit card if you want to do it that way, and it will still go to the place. There's a jar out there, and of course cash will work, and it will go straight to you, or to the fund, or you can also give to, you can write the check out to Shai Fund, spelled S-H-A-I, fund, and write the check there. Or if that's not confusing, you can put Christ Community Church, and we'll make sure it goes to there. So that's one way that you can give financially. There's a newsletter back there, right? You can sign up to get more news, because somebody was asking about how do we stay plugged in and figure out what's going on. Thank you for all that you're doing. It's a lot. It's real eye-opening as to how easy we have it here. But I do agree with you that one of the big things that I think all of us here in this room agree on is that whether you're the one speaking, or you're the one giving, or you're the one backing the sound booth, we all play a part. And we like to raise that banner in our own churches, but that's also true globally, that we can all play a part. From the smallest to the greatest, to the least amount given to the greatest amount given, we can all play a part, because it all plays. I'd ask that we all stand. And, I want to close this in prayer, and then we will dismiss for the evening. I'm sure Charmaine will be around if you want to talk to her personally, or get more information. Let's go, Lord. Father God, we thank you for all the work that's being done by organizations like the Shai Fund. God, for the boldness that you have placed in Charmaine, and for the call that you have placed on her life. She goes places, God, that are just unreal and tough. Places that her dad has said he's not going. God, we thank you that there are people that are going. God, we thank you that we have opportunities in this land to make differences and to do things that impact your kingdom. God, I pray that we would take it upon our heart not to just have a momentary fire as a result of meeting these or seeing these videos, but God, that we would take it to heart that we have to be involved in your kingdom. And that kingdom is much further spread out than we know. So God, I pray that you would help us to know exactly how you want us to get plugged in. Make the right phone calls, the right connections, raise the right banners, and make the right stands in the right places that would make notice, would receive notice, and would, God, that we would be able to bring attention to this place that you are working. God, also for the finances that they need to start these businesses, to start these families on different tracks and plans in life, God, that you can meet their needs. God, I pray for the people that are here, but also the other ones that Charmaine will talk to, God, that you'd raise up people that can meet these needs and can give to them. God, I pray for Charmaine and for all the people that she works with. God, I pray for your hedge of protection around her. That God, as you, the testimony given tonight of the grandmother, the blinding light around her. God, I pray for that protecting light around her and for her organization. God, I pray for the people that are working over there, God, that they would see you as that bright light. And as Chris mentioned, God, that it would be missional, that through serving these practical needs, they would see that the hand of God is moving. And there's something different for the people following after you, and it would draw people to you. God, help us to be a part of providing for that. It's in your name we pray.
Amen.
Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for being a part. And please, as Charmaine and Malcolm can also probably answer some questions. He looks like he's knowledgeable. But
We're going to introduce
you are dismissed.
Yeah. Gary.